prediction. Gentlemen, let's go through here. Start with Judd. With the Vikings schedule, what is the one thing that stands out to you above all else as you look at the official slate of games here? I'll just speed through it one more time. Green Bay at home, at the Colts in week 2, home against the Titans in week 3, back-to-back road games weeks 4 and 5 against Houston and Seattle, home against Atlanta before a bye week in week 8, out of the gate after the bye at Green Bay, home against Detroit, at Chicago on Monday night, short week back home against Dallas, another home game against Teddy Bridgewater's Panthers, another home game against the Jaguars, at Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, home against Chicago in week 15, and then weeks 16, 17 on the road. Christmas, Friday, short week, Drew Brees and the Saints, and then at Detroit. What stands out most to you? What's the number one thing that you're like, wow, interesting when you look at the schedule?
Can I give you two things quickly? The first,
you're already cheating. Already cheating.
I want to cheat, but I want to cheat. There's something very important to point out that the pundits might miss on. Look at the schedule that you have posted and look at the person in that schedule and then tell me you don't think he's going to get a contract extension. To me,
Dalvin Cook's going to be much needed.
It's very telling that you signed your quarterback. Your quarterback's my quarterback, man. You signed him to a contract extension and he's not on your schedule. Dalvin Cook is. He's getting a contract extension. Judd doesn't approve maybe, but that's the fact. Okay. The thing about the schedule that stands out to me is the one screw job is the Packers thing. Because if you have fans by the time they play the Packers in Lambeau and you didn't have fans here, that's a bit of a screw job. And I'd like to elaborate on that further. But as far as the team's fault, boys, if I'm the Vikings, I love this. As far as the team's fault, because there were permeations of this schedule. Perhaps instead of getting 3 consecutive home games, which is rare, you get 3 consecutive road games, which is very tough. There would have been versions of this schedule at which I would have probably not gone 10-6. But if you look at how it falls, if you look at the home and road distribution of when those games are, I think by December 13th, I'm not joking. I think that there's a chance that Brady is falling off, but by then, I think Brady's going to get off to a great start. I guess my question is, by December, is he still going to be great? I don't know about that. The 2 road games to finish with aren't easy, but you do get Detroit, so okay. So I guess at first blush, as far as it falls, if I'm the Vikings, I'm happy about that, Phil.
Dex, what about you? What's the number one thing that stands out to you?
Well, we knew going in that the road opponents were going to be tough. I think this has those set up so perfectly for the Vikings. The toughest part is obviously Deshaun Watson into Russell Wilson, and those are probably they're going to be their toughest back-to-back games of the season, regardless. But everything else is spread out so nicely. I mean, you have the Saints on Christmas Day. The Bears games was much before that too. You have time to prepare going into Green Bay off the bye week. Yes, the opponents are tough, but I actually think the Vikings, the way the schedule laid out, it ended up being very, very gracious to them. They're going to have to actually be able to go into a lot of those games, and I think be well prepared for them. And actually going 4-4 on the road or 5-3 is actually more realistic than it was, I think, before the schedule came out.
Yeah, my number one takeaway is that with all the different potential landmines, when you looked at the opponents and the quarterbacks on your schedule, before we knew what the order of the games was, I mean, we know that the Vikings for sure have 5 games, so 30 to 33% of their schedule, 1/3 of their schedule against Hall of Fame quarterbacks, 2 games against Aaron Rodgers, 1 game against Russell Wilson, 1 game against Drew Brees, another game against Tom Brady. So a 30-year schedule is against surefire Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And as I look at this, you don't play back-to-back games against Hall of Fame quarterbacks. So the Hall of Famers are spread out. If you want to put Deshaun Watson on that list, because I think that dude is amazing, and if you want to even put Dak Prescott on that list, let's say you've got a couple guys who are going to eventually emerge into the top 5 list of NFL quarterbacks. So that gives you 7 games, basically half your schedule against Hall of Famers or guys who are about to maybe emerge in the top 5 of NFL quarterbacks. You only have 1 set of back-to-back games with those quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson, in weeks 4 and 5. So like Declan said, the number one thing that stands out to me is you don't really have a murderer's row portion of this schedule. In fact, you get the 3 consecutive home games at the end of November and the beginning of December. You never get 3 consecutive road games on here. In fact, you only have 2 back-to-back road game situations all year long. And I just think for how this schedule could have been laid out, and for, could there have been a stretch where you get like 3 straight Hall of Fame quarterbacks and 2 of those games are on the road and one's on a short week or something, right? You just don't really have a murderer's row. Every step of the way, you've got a game against the Jaguars that's kind of soft, or you got your road game against the Colts early on that you should probably win. Home game against the Panthers that you should probably win against Teddy Bridgewater. So it feels pretty good once you lay it out on paper like this.
And let's not lie too. There is, because of the fact that you only have right now, and of course games could get flexed, but 2 primetime games. If you're Zimmer, you're ecstatic, right? Because your team's not, like, for the most part, you're playing noon games where there's pressure, but it's not the same. And so if I'm the Vikings, I love this because I don't want my secondary to be exposed on prime time, right? If I can, and I'm not saying he can't win in prime time, he showed he can, but if I'm the Vikings, I want to dial the pressure down on my quarterback as much as possible. This does that. The league, for the most part, did the Vikings a very, very big solid because, at Chicago is tough, at Seattle is tough, but there would have been a lot of permeations. Houston, that easily could have been a primetime game. Deshaun Watson might have exposed you bad. Now, if he does, it's just part of a noon game and it sucks, but but okay. So, yeah, I think that the league, for the most part, to the Vikings, a big favorite.
I will say this, too, about the primetime thing. I don't think the narrative fits as much now as it did a couple years ago with Kirk, because Kirk had that game against Dallas, obviously had the game in the playoffs with the 40-yard pass that sets up the game-winning touchdown. So I would be curious to see Kirk with 5 more primetime games like they had last year. And I'm actually, like, on the flip side of things that stood out to you. I think one of the things that I'm kind of buzzkilled on is, why do you play the Packers twice at noon? Are you kidding me? Like, Vikings, Packers, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Mike Zimmer. Like,
if you're the Vikings, you should love that. I'd love that personally.
Just because there's less pressure on you?
Yeah, and because
I don't think they think of it that way, though. I think they welcome that primetime.
You know who gets tight to me, boys? Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer gets tight. I think he gets tight. I think this helps. I'm just saying, I would, if I'm the Vikings. Now games can be flexed. Keep that in mind. But if I'm the Vikings, I really like this. And you know what this says, and it does not surprise me. And I'm curious, you guys might disagree with me completely, but the reality is the Vikings really aren't a sexy team now, which is also fine. But, like, there's not a lot of, because Kirk Cousins now to me is not this unknown of, oh, he's this QB and can he do this? We sort of know who Kirk is. If I'm the national TV people, I don't blame them for not pushing things and being like, give me more Vikings.
But they were sexy enough last year to have 5 primetime games.
I know, but
does the lack of Stephon Diggs make them less primetime sexy?
I'm going to tell
the
you
Minneapolis Miracle guy.
I'm going to tell you right now, I think knowing, as we talked about today on our Purple Daily podcast, I think knowing who Kirk Cousins is makes them less sexy. I think they're married to Kirk now. I think Kirk was the hot girlfriend at one time, and now I think they're married to him, and he's fine. But when I look at the Vikings and their defensive losses and this team, I'm not saying they're a bad team, because I don't think they're a bad team. Don't get me wrong here. But I just don't see them as a real sexy national TV primetime proposition, which, if I'm the Vikings personally, I sort of like.
Yeah, I get that
But
too. And I think also, though, with, like, looking at what happened to the defense, and even though defense is not what the sexy factor is on a Monday Night Football game or a primetime game, Mike Zimmer's defense is, like, basically depleted. So if he's going to make it work, he's going to have to make it work with rookies and guys that we haven't heard of before, and national TV people probably don't like that. The one game that could probably be flexed in is the Tampa Bay game. I mean, if you look up and down, I don't think they flex out after week 8. I think it's after week 8 they can start flexing things in and out of their schedule. And obviously, if it's a December game, Tom Brady and the Vikings are both, 8-3 or vying for a top seed in the NFC. That's probably going to be the only one that gets flexed in, unless things in Detroit get really hairy for the last wild card spot. But I would say the Tampa Bay game is probably your best chance of a primetime game coming into the schedule.
Yeah, I agree with Declan on that too. That one is ripe for flexing.
What is the Buccaneers' schedule? I'm trying to find it right now. I'm curious. They've got to have a ton of primetime games, right? Already?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Because that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a lot like the Golden State Warriors the past few years, where they're just on TNT and ESPN for every single game.
Week 5 Thursday night game at the Bears. Week 7 Sunday night game at the Raiders.
Okay.
Week 8 at the Giants Monday night game. Week 9 another Sunday night game at the Saints.
So that's four in the first half.
Week 11 they get the Rams at home on a Monday night game.
Wow.
I'm going through it still. Let's see if that's it. That's it.
But more to be flexed later.
I think you don't you max out at some point with the amount of primetime
Yeah,
games?
they have. Is this right? So they have 3 consecutive primetime games at Raiders, at Giants, home against New Orleans, right? And then Rams. So that's 5 primetime games and no primetime games in the last month and a half of the season. But there's a 4:25 game against Kansas City on November 29th, which CBS probably hangs on to that because that's the thing. Fox and CBS can protect some of those games too.
Correct. I bet that's protected right now.
Interesting. So, all right. Well, you guys.
That's my Dalvin Cook point. I think he's on the schedule.
Yeah, it's pretty rare that they would put out marketing materials. I do think the Vikings, like Rick Spielman's been on the record a couple times saying, hey, we're negotiating with them or we're going to enter conversations after the draft. I don't think the Vikings are doing this in bad faith. I think the question is, what does the contract look like? How much guaranteed money? And at what age is he when the money starts to run out? Because if you're paying him much beyond like 2 or 3 years of guaranteed money, that's when you really run up against an age cliff. And that's for running backs that are even durable at this point. He hasn't been durable to this point in his young career. And we can do a separate deep dive on Dalvin Cook altogether at some point. I just think there's 2 different tracks here. Track number 1 is you probably shouldn't pay running backs a lot of money because of the position, the attrition, and just a number of different factors that have been proven over and over again. How many big money running back contracts do you actually feel good about when they're over? And the answer is like none, right? So that's one track, and I fully get that. But the other track is if you're trying to win as many games as possible in 2020 and your goal is still to win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins in his prime and Adam Thielen in his prime and Mike Zimmer on the last year of his contract, you need Dalvin Cook to be on your team and happy. And because he's one of the 3 best running backs in the NFL, and he's probably your best overall weapon now that Stephon Diggs is gone.
Can I tell you this? That schedule with Cook smiling and the football cradled. 1 is the Zim philosophy on life when it comes to his offense. And 2 is the exact reason why Stephon Diggs is in Buffalo right now. That is, I'm serious.
Touche.
That's why Stephon Diggs is in Buffalo. And he might have been right. He might be wrong. I don't know, but that's your answer.
Yeah. So, well, that's a wrap. We're going to have plenty more on this on Friday's episode of Mackey and Judd and on Purple Daily, which, I love. There's been just a lot of stuff happen here at Score North over the past week or so. We had a lot of our friends and colleagues were laid off as part of company decisions related to COVID-19. And so we're dusting ourselves off. We're picking up the torch and we're running with it as much as we can. And we're rooting for our teammates wherever they wind up. So stick with us here on Purple Daily. Stick with us here on the Score North YouTube page, youtube.com/Score North. Give us a subscription. Give us a 5-star review on our podcasts on Apple if you listen, and subscribe to those too on Apple, Spotify, or just find them on scorenorth.com. The Vikings schedule is out. I can speak on behalf of, I think, all football fans here. Thank you to the NFL. The NFL doesn't get a lot of things right, it feels like, over the years. Thank you to the NFL for giving us free agency, the draft, and a schedule release as originally scheduled. Super fun stretch here during a tough period.